Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Stevens. Today, we're going to talk about the principles of rhetoric. Okay, this is a handy dandy tool that you can use to analyze anything that you encounter in your classes. All right, so here we go. I'm going to go back here a second. Okay, so I put these here in order that you can help you remember SOAP, right? It's kind of like Roy G. Biv when you're trying to remember the colors of the rainbow. And we're going to start with the bottom one first. But before we do that, I probably want to define rhetoric. You've probably heard this term thrown around a lot, right? But nobody ever defines it. You sometimes hear it in political conversations like, okay, Senator, you need to stop with your hollow rhetoric, right? But it's actually the basis where we get the word writer from. And rhetoric is any kind of act that comes from, that can be analyzed, right? So once you sort of think about that as a text, right? And the text here, I don't mean just a written text. It could be a poem, a podcast, could be a film, could be an essay, could even be like a figure or in popular culture, like Timothy Chalamet. We can analyze Timothy Chalamet's sort of effect in society, right? In the culture, what people think about him, all those kinds of things. You could even talk about this class, right, as an act of rhetoric. And clearly, this video that I'm making is an act of rhetoric. Okay, so again, anytime you look at these texts, you want to think about it in these four terms. So purpose, right? So what is the text purpose? And if it's an analytical essay, that might be the thesis statement, right? But if it's a film or something like that, that can be harder to understand. And again, filmmakers sometimes have a purpose in mind that's more highbrow, right? To raise awareness about an issue, but it might just be to entertain you, right? Or it might just be to get your $15 at the movie theater, right? So, but you always want to think about when you encounter a text about what is its purpose, and is it doing that effectively? So the second element here is audience. And again, I'm a big politics fan, and so one of the things here is, right, like I'm amazed that these politicians go out on the road and they don't change their stump speech. So whether they're addressing the National Education Association or the National Rifle Association, they say the same thing. And they're missing a huge opportunity, right? Because you want to craft that rhetoric to a particular audience to make it effective. Occasion, the third thing here is very hard to sort of get at first glance. It's all the noise that goes on around a text that sort of affects that text, your understanding of it. So in other words, if I were to show in class I Am Legend, which is a movie about a zombie apocalypse that is caused by a disease, it would be weird if I didn't talk about the pandemic, because that's the moment that we're in. And as you watch that movie, you're probably thinking about the pandemic. Obviously, the audience that watched that movie when it came out weren't in that same occasion, right? And then style here is kind of all the stuff we do in the writing center, right? If it's something written, is your rhetoric, is it clear, right? Is it reader friendly? Does it unfold in a good structured way that allows the reader to follow what you're saying, right? Does it have a through line? And then of course all that grammar and spelling and all those kinds of syntax and all those kinds of things. If it's something visual, right, it's all like, if it's a film, it's all the fun stuff you get to talk about in a film class, right? Lighting, composition, color, music, editing, camera angles, all those kinds of things are part of a director's style, of a filmmaker's style. Okay, so I thought we'd get into some examples here. Like I said, I'm a big politics nut, so I thought I'd give you a couple examples of fails, political ads that fail their purpose. So this top one here is from Michael Dukakis. He ran against George Bush Sr. in 1988 for president. And George Bush Sr. was a war hero. He was a fighter pilot. He had run the CIA. So nobody worried about him being commander-in-chief, right? So actually, George Bush's campaign sort of tried to paint Michael Dukakis as soft on defense. And to counteract that, Michael Dukakis's people put out this video of him riding around in a tank. And that's what you see a picture here from here. And if you watch that video, I mean, it is scary. You do not want this person running our military. At one point, he kind of looks at the camera, which you see right here, and he goes, it's almost like he's saying, hey guys, I'm riding a tank. And it's really, really, really cringy. And again, it's one of the reasons why he lost the election. the picture here on the bottom is from John Kerry, who ran against George Bush Jr. in 2004. And the rap on George Bush Jr. was he was like an every person, right? Like the kind of person you wanted to have a beer with, right? For better or worse. But John Kerry was heir to the Heinz ketchup fortune. So George Bush's people tried to paint him as an elitist, right? Someone that's out of touch with the common person. And again, John Kerry's people put out this picture of him windsurfing as a way to, I think, show that he's athletic, that like he's just a regular guy, that, you know, he does extreme sports and that he's youth oriented, right? The problem is, of course, is not all of us are out windsurfing on the Cape on our weekends off, right? So it's kind of an elitist sport. And again, George Bush's ad people had this brilliant idea of taking this picture, and they probably spent about $50 on Photoshop to make this work. And all they did was they took this picture and they flipped it back and forth, which is like, you know, a transition you can do in Photoshop, right? And the copy was something along the lines of, John Kerry says he's for the war in Iraq, but then he says he's against it. I guess some people's opinions change with the wind, right? And ever after on the campaign trail, George Bush called John Kerry a flip-flopper. He's a flip-flopper, right? And so again, that was political scientists point to this ad in this moment as one of the reasons that John Kerry lost the election. And he didn't lose by much, right? So this failed political ad may be very well why George Bush Jr. got a second term. Okay, so here's an example of a failed audience. This is from a comic book about 1973 called Betty and Veronica. And I'm just going to put you back in the moment of comic books at the time. This is before women primarily were the audience for comic books. Now it's about half and half. It was mostly boys. And again, comic books, whether girls, was for girls and boys, like ages 9 to 15, something along those lines. And you got to remember how people bought comic books. They actually went out and physically went to a 7-Eleven, and you would get on one of these old school stands and you'd flip through the comic books and kind of look at the covers and sort of pick out what you wanted. And you see the price here is 20 cents, right? So it's competing with a Coke or a chocolate bar. I mean, now I think comic books are like $5 a pop. So now it's like, you know, a meal at a fast food restaurant versus a comic book, very different stakes. So again, the cover's job is to get the viewer to pay that 20 cents. All right, so again, the audience here primarily is like girls 9 to 14. And if you look at the front here, it says, Ronnie, there's someone I want you to meet. Is it someone important or is it a girl, right? Not a great idea to insult your core audience on the cover of the magazine you're trying to sell, right? And I've actually looked at sales figures for Betty and Veronica from this time period, and this month's issue sold a lot fewer copies than the ones around it. So there's a real tangible, you know, data there that this was a fail on their part. And the kicker to me is this like female character in the corner. She's sort of staring at us out from the frame of the cover. And, you know, we don't like that as spectators, especially in a narrative. That's why actors don't look at the camera, because it kind of breaks that fourth wall and sort of it's invasive to our sort of voyeuristic space of consuming the narrative. And so to me, like, again, she doesn't have a dialogue bubble here, but to me, it might as well be like she's saying something along the lines of, yeah, girls suck, right? Like underscoring this idea that girls aren't important. So again, very, very bad idea if you're trying to get your young girl to pay 20 cents. So this, you know, young girls probably bought a lot more chocolate bars and soda pops that month, right? Okay. Here's an example of probably, unfortunately, successful marketing. This is from a James Bond poster back in the 1980s. And as you can see here, this is a feminist nightmare. This poor woman is shot from the waist down, right? We don't see her face. She's completely an object. She's only a body parts. We don't know who she is. And of course, the kicker is that every phallic war machine, guns and, you know, submarines and motorcycles and all this kind of stuff is aimed at her, right? So this is meant to kind of play into male power fantasies, right? Sex and violence, and that, you know, that women can be dominated and objectified. And unfortunately, that was probably effective marketing back then. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we've come a little way in that I don't think you'll see a poster this blatantly misogynistic and disturbing, but a lot of the same marketing strategies, a little more subtle, are still used. But this is probably was a, you know, a successful ad campaign at the time. Okay, so occasion, like I said, is one of the harder things to explain here. But occasion is all that noise around a text. So one of my favorite examples of this is from a 1998 movie called Fight Club. And Fight Club was a critique of material culture. So you had like all this rhetoric in it of like sort of wanting to tear the world down and start over because things had become too corporate. This is back in the time period when there were these obnoxious T-shirts that people wore that said like "He who dies with the most toys wins," and it was the .com boom, so people were materialistic excessively. Obviously, not all people, but this message was in the culture. And in fact, in Fight Club, there's this great scene where the main character's apartment is laid out like a Pottery Barn catalog. And it shows their apartment, it shows the price tag for all the things in that apartment, kind of displaying this kind of, destructive material culture that everybody was infatuated with. So at the end of this movie, the main character kind of becomes a terrorist and sort of tears this world down, and all these buildings collapse. They actually blow up at the end of the movie. And again, it was meant to sort of criticize materialism. Interesting message in 1998, but of course, this happens in 2001. And so if I'm going to talk about Fight Club in Manhattan in, say, October of 2001, I damn well better talk about the occasion, right? I mean, if I don't, if I show that movie and then turn up the lights, everybody's going to be traumatized and thinking about September 11th. And if I just ignore that context, if I ignore the occasion, people aren't even going to be listening to my message because they're going to be thinking about that. So again, the way this kind of works for you all is that you want to sort of take a look at whatever your subject is and think about what's going on around it. Like for some reason, if you have to write a paper on Britney Spears, you're going to want to talk about that conservatorship. Even if that's not the focus of your paper, it's something you could do in an introduction to sort of kind of show that you're up on the latest kind of noise surrounding Britney Spears, right? And so here's another example of this. This is from 1957. It's a cover of a magazine called Amazing Stories. And again, this is the actual month when Sputnik flew over, the Russian satellite flew over the United States. And lots of people talk about how scary that was, right? That the Russians had this dominance in space. And you could literally see it coming across the sky at night. So this was like the motivation for the Rocket Boys that were in West Virginia to go start working on rockets in high school. And so again, you can't evaluate this copy of Amazing Stories, which was on the stands as Sputnik is going over, without thinking about that context. And you see here, you've got all this stuff about outer space saucers, a myth, right? But it's the idea of terror from the skies, right? And a lot of drive-in movies at the time, like movies like there's a really scary movie, well, it's not scary now, about these radioactive ants called Them. And the idea is this radiation occurs like fallout from nuclear testing, right? And the ants grow really, really large, and then they basically turn human beings into a hive mind. So they take away their individuality. And then, of course, there's all these movies about space aliens coming down and taking us over. And so, again, those are thinly veiled ideas that show our fear during the Cold War of Russia, that Russia's going to come down, the missiles are going to rain down, they're going to take over America and turn our individuality into a collective, a communist collective. And so, again, that occasion, that historical occasion, is a prime way that you can think about how, if you were evaluating, like your assignment was to evaluate this cover, right, for its rhetoric, you would want to think about the occasion at the time. Okay. So, so I wanted to talk now about how this applies to the film trailer assignment. So again, when you're analyzing a film trailer, it's a text, right? So the purpose is really clear. A film trailer is an advertisement trying to get you to the theater and pay the $15 plus popcorn and Coke, right? And so you don't have to worry about purpose when you're analyzing your film trailers. But audience can be very interesting, right? Sometimes the audience is very, very specific. For example, Dune is coming out this week. And again, the primary audience for that probably is sci-fi fans from 20 to 50, right? Younger people, ideally. And again, they put Timothée Chalamet in that movie. He's probably one of the hottest actors right now to sort of attract a younger audience, and also because he's good, right? But all those kinds of things. They also probably want to attract the people that love the novel. And again, those people are my age or older. The novel came out before I was born. So there's probably some stuff in there meant to appeal to that audience, right? and then they've also got to worry about, there was a really bad David Lynch movie that came out in 1984 that some people may remember, and they're probably trying to set themselves apart from that film and making clear to the audience that they are not that film, right? So all these things might be ways that you see in the text that they're addressing a certain audience, okay? So again, then occasion is also interesting, right? Like, what's going on in the culture right now that affects Dune? Well, the basic plot of Dune is all these sort of noble houses are fighting for this rare spice that only can be found on this planet Arrakis. So again, people are doing all sorts of horrible things, both environmentally and to each other, to capture control of this natural resource. Well, you can see how that fits into globalism and to supply chain shortages and to people starting wars to get oil and all that kind of stuff. You see the same thing in Avatar, right? They're invading this planet because they want this something called unobtainium or something like that, which is ridiculous. I'm not a big fan of that movie. But anyway, so that's something you could talk about, right? That's a current occasion that plays into a sort of our reading of Dune. And then style, right? That's all the stuff in the film that you could talk about, like I say, lighting, composition, all those kinds of things. And again, you may not know the film terms, but you can talk about sort of how that works. And in a typical film trailer, there might be as many as 200 shots. So there's plenty of material that you want to work with, you can work with here. And again, you want to think from the bottom up. You want to think from these moments. So if you should watch this thing several times, and you might want to isolate a shot or two that intrigues you and you go, why am I finding that interesting? And how is it serving its purpose of getting me to want to come to the theater, right? And sometimes that stuff is not complicated. It might be, shots of bodies, right, of male and female bodies, and that's intriguing, right? You get attracted to that, and you go, I want to go to the theater to see more of Zendaya and Timothy Chalamet, right? Might be explosions and violence, right? Might be pretty scenes, might be things that scare you, right? Monsters, things like that. All those are things that we call spectacle, and that is a way to sort of, on a more gut level, to attract viewers, attract spectators to come see a movie. But obviously there's more complicated ways you can do that. A lot of times what trailers do is they plant questions in the viewer's mind that we can only get answered if we go and we pay our $15 to see the movie, right? So a lot of times you'll see characters in the trailer ask questions that we might want answered. There's a great moment in the Hobbit trailer, the first Hobbit trailer, which is a very disappointing movie, but it's got this shot of Gandalf who looks in the camera and he goes, I'm looking for someone to go on an adventure. And he's talking, of course, to Bilbo, but he's also really talking to us. Like, he wants us to come to the movie to go on this adventure. So look for that too, for characters that ask questions. And again, you could talk about audience in terms of like a generic audience, a larger audience, or you can also talk about yourself. You can do this in the first person and talk about yourself. So that's basically it. That's what you're going to do here for this assignment. One final thought though here is, once you get a draft of your paper, that too becomes a text that can be evaluated using these principles of rhetoric. So when you finish the text, you got to think about, okay, has my paper served its purpose? And the purpose again is to show how this film trailer gets the audience to come to the theater, right? So have I done that? Your audience is me to a certain extent, right? Like professors love to hide behind that generic term. Well, you're not writing for me, you're writing for an academic community, but you're really writing for me, right? I'm the one giving you a grade. That doesn't mean that your purpose here is to sort of try to second guess how I feel and parrot that back at me, because I get much more interesting when I learn something about the trailer that I didn't know before, right? So again, but obviously the way that does work is that you want to have, that I'm an English professor, right? So you want to have not have typos and things like that, right? That for that way in that audience. Occasion, right? Well, again, so the occasion is a paper in a class, right? So you want to make sure that you are following the kind of conventions, right? But also too, whatever your subject is, you can use that as kind of a hook to kind of draw your reader in. Okay, so if I'm, like I said, if I'm talking about say a movie about the pandemic, a movie about disease, you probably want to mention the pandemic. And then style, of course, is all the stuff that we do in the writing center. So is your paper, engaging? Does it have, like I said, no typos? Is it something that we can follow clearly from paragraph to paragraph? So that's the way it works. Anyway, so thank you for your time, and I can't wait to see what you all write. Take care. Bye.